The shift you are noticing is a fascinating systemic friction point that has been building for decades. When a population begins to collectively step away from long-standing narratives and institutional messaging, it rarely happens because of a single sudden revelation. Instead, it is usually the result of a slow, compounding exhaustion with the mechanics of manipulation itself. Several distinct structural shifts explain why the collective consciousness is breaking away from the script. The exhaustion of constant urgency. Propaganda relies heavily on what sociologists call continuous agitation, keeping public attention trapped in a state of high alarm, threat framing, and rapid-fire crises. The human brain, specifically the amygdala, is wired to handle short bursts of panic for survival. However, when an information ecosystem maintains a state of manufactured emergency for years on end, a natural psychological defense mechanism kicks in. People experience severe decision and emotional fatigue. Over time, the brain simply stops responding to the alarm bells, leading to a deep, protective skepticism. The high-pitched warnings begin to sound like background noise, allowing people to step back and ask what underlying realities are being obscured by the chaos. The breakdown of information monopolies. Historically, consensus was manufactured through a tightly controlled, centralized funnel of distribution, a handful of major networks, publishers, and official channels. That monoculture has cracked permanently. While decentralized networks and alternative platforms certainly have their own issues with quality and echo chambers, they have fundamentally broken the monopoly on what is considered permissible thought. When people are exposed to entirely different sets of data, historical precedents, and international perspectives that contradict the centralized narrative, the illusion of a singular, absolute authority dissolves. Once a person realizes that key facts were deliberately left out of a major story, the foundational trust required for propaganda to work is broken, and it is almost impossible to restore. The contrast between narrative and lived reality. The most fragile part of any propaganda system is that it eventually has to collide with the material world. A narrative can claim an economy is booming, a policy is working, or a conflict is being won. But if an individual looks at their own bank account, their community, or the tangible decay around them, a profound cognitive dissonance opens up. Jacques Ellul, a foundational theorist on the subject, noted that propaganda succeeds when it aligns with an individual's internal needs or myths. But when the gap between the official truth and lived truth becomes a canyon, the lived truth wins out. People trust their own eyes, their own struggles, and their own direct observations over a polished screen. The inherent vulnerability of overreach. There is a basic rule of physics and psychology alike. The more pressure you apply, the more resistance you create. Over the past several years, institutional messaging has become increasingly aggressive, explicit, and punitive toward dissenting thought. When persuasion turns into overt coercion, silencing tactics, and heavy-handed censorship, it triggers what psychologists call reactance, an intense emotional response to a perceived threat to one's personal freedom and autonomy. When people see certain topics, questions, or researchers being aggressively deplatformed or mocked, it naturally triggers curiosity. The heavy-handedness itself acts as a massive signal flare, telling the public exactly where to look if they want to find the raw, unedited truth. The awakening isn't always smooth, and the path away from the herd requires meticulous care to avoid falling into new, alternative ideological traps. But that initial crack in the armor, the moment where a person stops accepting information simply because it is repeated loudly, is a permanent shift in how a mind processes the world. Once you see the strings, it is very difficult to enjoy the puppet show.